9 p.m., Saturday night. I'm standing in my own backyard, boots caked in dirt, sweat running down the back of my neck, staring at 40 strangers laughing and splashing in a glowing infinity pool, filled right now with my water. A line I dug, a line I paid for, a line I own. Private, permitted, my well pump straining in the dark, while their string lights twinkle above them like they're royalty. Cordelia Wentworth, sunglasses at night, that fake perfect smile glued to her face, turns and looks straight at me. Out here, we share resources, Darnell. That's what neighbors do. She says that, about my water, pouring straight into her $80,000 luxury pool, in front of all her high society friends. I don't shout, I don't call anyone. I just walk, over to the valve handle I installed 7 years ago, grip it tight, and make one decision that changes everything. What happens next? Rich neighbor ever steal from you? Comment what you would do in that exact moment. I read every one. My name is Darnell Briggs, and I am a third-generation water well man. My grandfather sank his first well in 1961 on 40 acres of red clay outside Culpeper County, Virginia. My father added a cistern and a pump house. I added the pipes, 2 miles of PVC buried 3 feet deep, permitted, inspected, and fully mine. There is no municipal water out here. You either have your own system or you haul it in drums like a pioneer. I chose the hard way and did it right. The property sits at the end of a gravel road, and when I say gravel, I mean it. You can hear every single tire that rolls over it from my kitchen. That crunch of stone under rubber is basically my security system. The air smells like pine resin and iron-rich earth after rain, and in August, the humidity wraps around you like a warm, wet towel the second you step off the porch. I love every inch of it. My wife, Priscilla, planted sweet corn along the eastern fence line. My boy Terrell learned to drive in the south field. This land is not real estate to us, it is the family. Then, about 6 years ago, the parcel directly north of mine sold. Cordelia Wentworth, 53 years old, recently divorced from a Virginia state senator, and carrying a chip on her shoulder the size of the Blue Ridge. She moved in with a decorator, a landscaper, 2 SUVs that cost more than my truck and my tractor combined, and an immediate, almost artistic talent for making everyone around her feel small. She joined the Briar Creek Rural Homeowners Association within the first 90 days. By month 4, she was on the board. By month 8, she was functionally running it, scheduling meetings nobody could attend, passing fee structures nobody voted on, and sending violation notices for things like aesthetically inconsistent fence staining. I got one of those. My fence is cedar. It has been cedar for 20 years. Cordelia decided cedar, apparently, needed to be pressure washed to a specific gray. I ignored it. That was my first mistake. Not because I was wrong to ignore it, but because ignoring Cordelia Wentworth is like ignoring a slow leak. It doesn't stop. It just finds a new direction. The luxury pool project started the following spring. I watched the excavators from my fence line, a 40 by 20 gunite basin, going in right along our shared property edge. Fine. People can put in pools. I didn't think much of it until July, when my water pressure dropped. Not a dramatic drop, just a slow, creeping loss. The kind that makes your shower feel lazy, makes your cistern cycle more often than it should. I checked my pump. I checked my filtration. Everything looked clean. Then Terrell, who was 18 at the time and sharper than I give him credit for, walked the east line and came back to the porch with a look on his face I hadn't seen since he totaled my riding mower. "Dad," he said, "somebody's got a line running off your main." I walked out with him, and there it was, a 3/4-inch copper branch tap, soldered onto my buried PVC main line, where it dipped closest to the property edge, run under the fence in a shallow trench that hadn't even been properly backfilled. The dirt was still loose. You could smell fresh-turned earth and flux paste from the solder joint, that faintly acidic, metallic smell that every plumber knows. Someone had tapped into my private water supply without asking, without easement, without so much as a knock on my door. The copper line ran directly to Cordelia Wentworth's pool equipment pad. I stood there in the August heat, pine trees buzzing with cicadas, red dirt on my boots, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something more patient than rage. Calculation. I did not call a lawyer first. I walked over. Priscilla told me to sleep on it. Terrell told me to call the sheriff. I did neither. I believe in giving a person one clean chance to do the right thing before you bring the machinery of consequence down on them. Because once you start that machinery, it is very hard to stop. So I put on a clean shirt, walked up Cordelia's paver driveway, the kind of paver that costs $12 a square foot and is designed entirely to make you feel like you are approaching someone important, and I rang the bell. She answered in a linen blouse, holding a glass of something with a sprig of something in it, and she looked at me the way people look at a car alarm, annoyed that it exists, vaguely superior to it. I told her, calmly, that someone had tapped my water line. I showed her a photo on my phone. I told her I needed it disconnected within 72 hours, and I'd consider the matter closed. She tilted her head. Oh, Darnell. Like I was a child explaining that the sky was blue and getting the shade slightly wrong. That little line has been there forever. I think it was the previous owners. And honestly, out here we all share resources. It's a community. We're rural. We help each other. You're drawing off my private system, I said, without an easement. Well, she smiled, I'm sure the HOA can work something out. A shared resource agreement, maybe a modest credit on your dues. A credit on my HOA dues. For my own water, running into her pool. I smiled back. I said, I'll be in touch. I went home. I got my camera, a real one, not a phone, with a timestamp function, and I documented everything. The tap, the trench, the copper run, the pool fill valve on her equipment pad. I measured the trench depth, photographed the solder work, and noted the date and time on a legal pad. Then I called the Culpeper County Water Resources Office. Here's something most people don't know. In Virginia, any unpermitted connection to a private water supply system that serves as the primary source for a residence is a Class 1 misdemeanor under Virginia Code Section 62.1-44.5. It doesn't matter if it's your neighbor's line or a municipal main. Tapping without authorization is theft of water, full stop. The county inspector I spoke with, a tired-sounding man named Gerald, who had clearly heard everything, told me he could send someone out within the week. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had a HOA violation notice in my mailbox. Unpermitted agricultural equipment visible from shared road corridor. Meaning, my tractor, which lives in my equipment shed, a shed that has existed since 1987, was now, per Cordelia's newly authored amendment to the community standards, aesthetically non-compliant because I'd left the shed door open. There it was. The retaliation, predictable as sunrise. What Cordelia didn't know, what she couldn't know because she hadn't done her homework, was that I'd already pulled the recorded plat map for our shared property line from the county registry. And buried in the 1978 deed language for my grandfather's original parcel was an easement description that included this phrase: right-of-way for utility access limited to the grantor's heirs and assigns, exclusive of third-party commercial use. The county easement that Cordelia's contractor had apparently tried to use as justification for the tap, it was a right-of-way for foot traffic and agricultural drainage, not water, not utilities, not her. But the language was just ambiguous enough that her lawyer, and I had to assume she had one, could argue the point, could drag it out, could make it expensive. That ambiguity, I decided, was not a problem. It was a door. And I was going to figure out exactly what was on the other side of it before I walked through. Gerald from the county called back Friday morning. He'd be out Monday. He sounded slightly less tired than before, which, from a county water inspector, is practically enthusiasm. I thanked him. Then I called my cousin Marcus, who is a licensed plumber, and more importantly, a man who understands that the best tools in any fight are documentation, patience, and the right shutoff valve at the right moment. Gerald arrived Monday morning in a county truck, clipboard in hand, coffee thermos under his arm, wearing the expression of a man who has seen too many property disputes and takes a private, professional satisfaction in every single one of them. He walked the line with me. He looked at the tap. He measured the draw capacity. He photographed the connection point with a county-issued camera that probably cost less than Cordelia's poolside throw pillows. Unauthorized connection to a private primary water system, he said, writing on his clipboard without looking up. Notice will be issued. She's got 30 days to disconnect, or face fines, and a potential misdemeanor referral. I asked him what the fine structure looked like. $250 a day after the notice period, he said, plus remediation costs. He handed me a copy of the preliminary notice. It smelled like fresh toner and, I will be honest, a little bit like justice. 3 days later, I got a letter, not from Cordelia, from a lawyer named Fitzgerald Horn, Esquire, out of Warrenton. Expensive stationery, the kind with a watermark you can feel with your thumb. The letter argued, with great grammatical confidence, that because the tap had been present on the property when Cordelia purchased it, installed, allegedly, by the prior owners, Cordelia had acquired a prescriptive easement through continuous, open, and uncontested use. Let me explain prescriptive easement in plain terms, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up. In Virginia, a prescriptive easement is essentially like adverse possession for a right-of-way. If someone openly uses a portion of your property for a specific purpose for 15 years, without your permission and without you objecting, they can potentially claim a legal right to keep doing it. It's the legal version of, well, we've always done it this way. The problem with Horn's argument? The tap was not 15 years old. I had my original system inspection records from 2017, which showed no branch connection at that location. The tap was new, the trench was new, the solder was new. Prescriptive easement requires uninterrupted use over a long period. Not 3 months of pool filling during the summer Cordelia Wentworth decided she wanted a luxury pool. Takeaway. Prescriptive easement claims fail when you can prove the use began recently, and dated inspection records are your best evidence. I brought the letter to Rebecca Okafor, a real estate attorney in Culpeper, who comes recommended by every landowner in the county who has ever been on the wrong side of a deed dispute. She read it, set it down, and said, "This is thin. They know it's thin. They're hoping you don't." She filed a formal water theft complaint with the county sheriff's office and sent a response to Horn that methodically dismantled the prescriptive easement argument with my inspection records attached. Meanwhile, I've been doing my own homework on the HOA. See, when Cordelia joined the Briar Creek Rural HOA Board, she'd pushed through a budget line item called Community Infrastructure Maintenance and Improvement, a discretionary fund that board members could draw from for pre-approved community assets. The pool, it turned out, was not the only thing benefiting from shared resources. She had billed $1,400 to that line item for drainage assessment consulting. The consultant's invoice was addressed to her personal home address. Sloppy. Very sloppy. But what really caught my attention was a clause buried on page 34 of the Briar Creek HOA bylaws. Section 12, paragraph 7. Any board member against whom a formal complaint of financial impropriety is filed may be subject to an independent audit of all HOA expenditures authorized during their tenure. Nobody had ever invoked it. It looked like the kind of clause put in by a careful original founder and then completely forgotten about for 20 years. I read it 4 times. Then I wrote it out longhand in my legal pad, circled it, and stuck a sticky note on it that said, "Later." Because the best traps aren't the ones you spring immediately. They're the ones you prepare slowly, carefully, and spring when the maximum number of people are watching. I just needed to figure out when that moment would be. 30 days passed. The tap stayed in. The fines began to tick. Cordelia's response to this was not compliance. It was escalation, which told me everything I needed to know about her strategy. When you can't win on the merits, you expand the battlefield. You make the other person fight on 6 fronts at once and hope they run out of money or energy before you do. She called a neighborhood meeting at the Briar Creek Community Hall, a low-ceilinged room that smells permanently of old coffee and carpet cleaner, with folding chairs that have been uncomfortable since approximately 1994. I know because I've been going to meetings there for 15 years. About 11 people showed up. Cordelia stood at the front, in a blazer, and told the assembled neighbors that Darnell Briggs had weaponized a bureaucratic process against community cooperation, and that my refusal to participate in shared rural resource planning was creating a hostile environment. It was, I have to say, an impressive performance. Confident, wounded-sounding, just aggrieved enough to seem credible. 2 neighbors, Earl Whitman, who has wanted Cordelia's approval since she moved in, and a younger couple named the Vanderfields, who were afraid of HOA fees, nodded along. But Eugenia Thackeray, who is 71 years old, has lived on her parcel since before I was born, and has approximately 0 patience for nonsense, leaned over to me and said, quietly enough that only I could hear. "She's scared, Darnell. Scared people get loud." She was right. I had learned to listen to Eugenia. The rezoning gambit came a week later. Cordelia, through the HOA, filed a request with the county zoning board to reclassify my equipment shed as a non-agricultural commercial structure, on the grounds that I had, on 2 occasions over the past 3 years, charged neighbors for tractor work, mowing 2 fields for pay. The implication was that my shed was therefore a commercial facility, subject to different setback and aesthetic requirements. If the reclassification succeeded, I would face either a forced removal of the shed or an expensive compliance rebuild. This was creative, expensive, time-consuming to fight, and designed purely to drain my resources and distract my attention. The smell of diesel from my tractor, the worn handle of my brush hog attachment, these were now somehow offenses in Cordelia Wentworth's vision of rural community life. What she didn't know, because she had bought her property 6 years ago and read none of the underlying permit history, was that I had pulled her pool permit from the county building office as part of my general document gathering. And there, in the variance application she'd filed for the pool's placement along the property line, was a requirement I recognized immediately. Applicant must obtain written acknowledgement of no objection from adjoining property owners prior to variance approval. Her contractor had submitted a form with a signature on it, a signature that was not mine. I'd never been contacted. I'd never signed anything. I called Rebecca Okafor. "Someone forged an acknowledgement signature on her pool variance application," I said. There was a pause on the line. "You're sure?" "I've got my notarized signature on file from 3 other county documents. It doesn't match." Another pause. "Darnell," she said, "that's not a civil matter anymore. That's a fraud matter." Takeaway: always pull the permit history on neighboring construction projects. Forged signatures on variance applications can void the entire permit and trigger criminal referral. The pool, structurally, was now built on a fraudulent permit. Every gallon of water filling it, water drawn from my line, was filling an unpermitted structure. I called Marcus that evening. We sat on my porch in the cooling August air, watching fireflies in the tree line, and I laid it all out. The tap, the fines, the forged signature, the HOA financial irregularities, the prescriptive easement bluff. Section 12, paragraph 7. Marcus cracked his knuckles the way he does when he's thinking about pipe configurations. "So what's the play?" I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, the slow, satisfied smile of a man who genuinely loves a well-designed system working exactly as intended. "You're going to need a second valve," he said. Rebecca Okafor called me on a Wednesday morning, and I could tell by the rhythm of her voice, measured, deliberate, with that slight uptick at the end of her sentences, that means she has found something, that the title search had produced results. "I need you to come into the office," she said. I sat across from her desk an hour later. She slid a photocopy across to me, a 1963 land covenant, recorded with the Culpeper County Clerk, attached as a deed restriction to the original parceling of the entire Briar Creek area. These kinds of covenants were common in rural Virginia subdivisions of that era. Broad strokes community use rules written to govern how land could be used before zoning codes caught up. The relevant clause was Section 4(b). No parcel holder shall divert, redirect, or draw from any private water supply system serving an adjacent parcel, whether by pipe, channel, or mechanical means, for commercial, recreational, or non-domestic purposes without a recorded shared use agreement filed with the county clerk. Recreational purposes. A pool is recreational. There was no recorded shared use agreement. There never had been. The covenant ran with the land, meaning it applied to every subsequent owner, including Cordelia Wentworth, whether she knew about it or not. Her title company was required to disclose deed restrictions. If they hadn't flagged this one, that was a separate problem for her to deal with her title insurer. But that wasn't the sharpest edge of the news. Rebecca had also tracked down the prior owners of Cordelia's parcel, a retired couple named the Farleys, who had used the property as a part-time hunting cabin. They'd sold to Cordelia and moved to Sarasota, Rebecca had called them. The Farleys had never installed any water tap on my line. They'd used a separate shared well that had since gone dry. The tap on my main line, installed in the spring of the same year Cordelia moved in, by a plumbing contractor she had hired, a contractor whose invoice Rebecca had subpoenaed through the civil discovery process. The prescriptive easement argument, Cordelia's entire legal defense, was built on a lie. The tap wasn't old. The Farleys didn't put it in. Cordelia's own contractor did it, at her direction, without permission, and then her lawyer had filed a legal claim asserting long-standing historical use. That is not a civil dispute. That is documented fraud. We now had 3 separate legal instruments: the water theft complaint with the sheriff, the fraudulent pool variance permit with the building authority, and the deed restriction violation with the county clerk's office. 3 different agencies, 3 different enforcement tracks, all converging on the same address. That evening, I sat down at the kitchen table with Priscilla and Terrell. Priscilla had made pork chops, the real kind, skillet fried, with the smell of butter and thyme filling the whole house. And I laid out everything: the covenant, the contractor invoice, the forged signature. Priscilla set down her fork. She built her whole defense on a lie. Yes, Terrell looked at me. So now what? I looked at both of them. My wife who had planted that corn along the fence line, my son who had found the tap in the first place. And I said, now we choose the right moment. Priscilla nodded. She understood. Timing is everything. You don't spend weeks building leverage and then spend it on a Tuesday. She's planning that pool party, Terrell said. The big one. She's been posting about it on the neighborhood Facebook group, inviting the county supervisor, the HOA district rep, a couple of local real estate people. I reached for my pork chop. I know. There is a particular satisfaction in building a system correctly. My grandfather taught me that. You don't rush it. You don't cut corners. You measure twice. You think 3 times. And when you finally turn that wrench, it should feel inevitable. Like the pipe was always supposed to go exactly there. The secondary valve took Marcus and me 4 hours on a Saturday morning, working in the narrow trench alongside my main line, where it ran closest to the fence. A standard gate valve, full bore, installed in a weatherproof valve box with a locking lid. The kind you can buy at any irrigation supply house for about $40. On my property, on my line. Entirely within my rights as the owner of a private water system to install, modify, or shut off at will, for any reason, at any time. Let me be crystal clear on the legal side of this, because it matters. When someone illegally taps your private water line without an easement, you are not required to give notice before discontinuing service. It's not a utility. It's not a public system. It is your pipe. You have no obligation to keep it flowing to someone who stole access to it. Shutting your own valve is not sabotage. It is property rights. Takeaway. Installing a lockable shutoff valve on your own private water main is a legal, inexpensive step that gives you physical control over unauthorized draws without requiring court approval. Marcus tested the valve twice. The handle turned smooth as butter. When it closed complete. No drip, no bleed through. He gave it the thumbs up the way he does when a system is right. One slow, satisfied nod. I locked the valve box and put the key on my keychain next to my truck key. Meanwhile, Rebecca was working the calendar like a chess player. Her strategy, which she explained to me over the phone in that measured, deliberate way of hers, was sequencing. We had 3 legal complaints ready to file or escalate. If we filed them all at once, Cordelia's lawyer could potentially get them consolidated, slow-walked, and quietly settled out of the public eye. But if we filed them in a specific order, at a specific time, in a public context, each one would land harder than the last. The party, she said, was our best opportunity. The county supervisor would be there. The HOA district rep would be there. Local real estate people, a dozen witnesses from the community. A public event where documents could be served, questions could be asked, and answers would be very hard to walk back. We hold the fraud referral, she said, until that evening. I'll arrange for the sheriff's office to execute it in person. They'll be happy to. Forging a variance signature is the kind of thing county building officials take personally. Eugenia Thackeray, bless that woman, had been doing her own organizing. Quietly, without drama, she had spoken to 4 other HOA members, longtime residents, who had watched Cordelia rewrite the community rules for 3 years, and said nothing, because nothing had ever seemed quite worth the fight. She read them Section 12, Paragraph 7. She read them the line items from Cordelia's infrastructure maintenance budget. She asked them one question. Do you want to know where your dues went? All four signed the audit demand. The audit demand had to be submitted at a board meeting. Cordelia had scheduled the next one for, and I promise I'm not making this up, the morning after her pool party, presumably planning to ride the social momentum of a successful gathering into a productive association session. That timing, it turned out, would work perfectly against her. I reached out to a journalist, Stanton Price, who writes a local investigative column for the Culpeper Star-Exponent and has been covering HOA governance abuse for 2 years. I didn't pitch him a story. I just told him I had documents related to a public official's attendance at a private event that involved a pending legal matter, and that he might want to be in the neighborhood that Saturday evening. Stanton, to his credit, asked exactly one question. What time? The last thing I prepared was the packet. 12 laminated copies, two-sided, tabbed, color-coded. The county notice, the deed restriction, the contractor invoice, the forged variant signature, the HOA financial line items, Rebecca's legal summary, 12 copies, because I counted the confirmed RSVPs to Cordelia's party, and I wanted to have enough. Priscilla watched me laminate the last one at the kitchen table. You've been looking forward to this, she said. Little bit, I admitted. She handed me a cup of coffee. Make it count. When someone realizes they are losing, and they still have resources, they don't surrender. They thrash. That is the word for it. Thrash. Like a fish on a line that still has fight left. Loud, energetic, increasingly random. Each move less coherent than the last. Cordelia thrashed beautifully. The first sign was a call from Rebecca on a Monday. Cordelia's lawyer, Fitzgerald Horn, had filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order in Culpeper Circuit Court. The motion alleged that Darnell Briggs was threatening to interfere with community water infrastructure in a manner that constituted tortious interference with property rights. Rebecca read the motion to me and then paused. He cited the wrong statute, she said. He cited the Municipal Water Interference Code, which applies to public utility systems. Your line is private. The statute doesn't apply. What happens to the motion? It gets dismissed, probably within 48 hours, but it buys her a week of publicity and costs you attorney fees to respond to. The motion was dismissed in 60 hours. The judge's written order used the phrase inapplicable statutory basis twice, which in judicial language is roughly equivalent to an eye roll. Then came Eugenia's phone call. Cordelia had driven to Eugenia's house, personally, in one of the SUVs, and sat in Eugenia's living room and offered her a complete fee waiver for 5 years and a seat on the HOA board's landscape committee. In exchange, Eugenia would withdraw the audit demand. Eugenia had listened politely, offered Cordelia a glass of iced tea, and then said, "Cordelia, honey, I have been on this land for 47 years. I have watched 4 different people try to run this community in ways that benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. I withdrew for 3 of them because I didn't have the documentation. I have the documentation now. Thank you for the tea offer, but I think you should go." I could have kissed that woman. The Facebook post came Thursday evening, and it was a masterpiece of implication. Cordelia wrote, in the Briar Creek Rural Neighbors group, that she had become aware of a neighbor who was planning to disrupt water service to community properties as a retaliatory act, and that she was deeply concerned about the well-being of all residents, especially elderly neighbors and families with young children, who depend on reliable water access. She never named me. She didn't have to. Comments poured in. Most of them were confused. People asking who was doing this, what was happening, should they be worried. Earl Whitman posted a fire emoji. A woman I didn't know asked if she needed to fill her bathtub. I did not respond. Not a word. Not a like. Nothing. Because here is the thing about a smear campaign run by someone who is legally in the wrong. Every post is a document. Every claim that doesn't hold up is evidence of bad faith. I screenshotted each one, time-stamped it, and added it to my packet. Cordelia was handing me an additional exhibit. Rebecca filed a formal defamation preservation notice with Facebook's legal team, flagging the posts as potential litigation evidence. This meant the platform was obligated to preserve the post data, even if deleted. Cordelia didn't know that. I spent that Thursday evening in my equipment shed, the supposedly commercial classified, aesthetically non-compliant shed, doing what I do when I need to think clearly. Routine maintenance. The smell of diesel, the grease on my hands, the familiar weight of a ratchet. There is nothing quite like mechanical work for quieting the noise in your head. Every bolt that tightens is a small act of order in a chaotic situation. The party was in 9 days. I checked the valve box on my way back to the house. Lock was solid. Key in my pocket. I looked north toward the blue glow of Cordelia's landscape lighting, heard the distant sound of her automated pool system cycling, and thought about 40 guests arriving in 9 days to swim in water they didn't know was stolen. Then I went inside and slept very well. The settlement offer arrived 8 days before the party, through Horn's office, a check for $3,000, framed as a neighborly gesture for any inconvenience caused by the waterline installation. Language so carefully crafted to imply accident rather than theft that I had to admire the wordsmithing even as I was rejecting it. The attached non-disclosure agreement was 2 pages long and would have required me to make no further public statements about the water tap, the permit issue, the HOA finances, or any related matters in perpetuity. Rebecca called me after reading it. "The NDA," she said, "is an admission." Explain. Innocent people don't pay you $3,000 to stay quiet. They fight it, or they ignore it, or they apologize and fix it. They do not write 2-page non-disclosure agreements. This document, if she proceeds to trial, will be Exhibit 1 for consciousness of guilt. I told Rebecca to decline formally, in writing, preserving the offer in the record. 3 days later, Cordelia's landscaper appeared at the fence line with a survey marker, one of the orange-capped stakes I'd had placed years ago to delineate the property boundary near the tap, and pulled it up. Then he pulled up 2 more along the eastern line. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, without saying a word. I called a licensed land surveyor that afternoon. In Virginia, removing or disturbing a recorded survey monument is a Class 6 felony under Code Section 55.1-2821. I did not lead with that information. I just asked the surveyor to come re-establish my monuments at his earliest convenience. He came the next morning, reset all 3 markers with concrete anchors, and generated a dated survey report. I added it to the packet. What Cordelia didn't account for, and this is the part that almost made me feel sorry for her, almost, is that it was August in Virginia, and we were 3 weeks into a dry stretch. No significant rain. Water table down. My system's cistern was cycling efficiently because I'd built it right, sized it for drought conditions, and maintained it. But a pool in late summer, in a dry spell, loses water to evaporation at a meaningful rate. Her pool was losing 2 to 3 inches a week. Without a fill source, she'd start showing bare walls. She needed my water to make the party work. I used my full water pressure for the first time all summer. I ran the drip irrigation on Priscilla's sweet corn. I filled the stock tank. I ran the outdoor shower on the back porch, the one I use after field work, for 10 uninterrupted minutes, which, let me tell you, is a profound luxury after a summer of careful conservation. The water was cold and clean, smelled faintly of minerals, and hit the cedar boards with a sound like sustained applause. It was the best shower I'd had in months. The day before the party, I watched the catering tent go up through my back fence. White canvas, string lights, the whole production. Folding tables being carried across pavers. A bar setup going in near the pool deck. I counted the setup crew, 6 people. Estimated 40 guests. The county supervisor's car would be recognizable. I knew the plate. I texted Stanton Price. "Tomorrow evening, 8 p.m. Bring a camera." He replied in under 30 seconds. "Already planning on it." I texted Rebecca. "Ready on your end? Sheriff's deputy will be present from 7:30. Documents are filed and sealed pending service." I texted Eugenia. "Thank you for everything." She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and then, after a pause, a small American flag. I loaded 12 laminated packets into the back seat of my truck. I set the valve box key on my nightstand. I checked the weather. Clear, low 80s, light breeze out of the west. Perfect evening for a pool party. Priscilla packed a thermos of coffee for me. The good stuff, dark roast, the smell of it filling the kitchen like a benediction, and said, "Bring me home something worth hearing about." I kissed her on the cheek. Count on it. At 8:45 on a Saturday evening in late August, the party was everything Cordelia Wentworth had designed it to be. The string lights across her pool deck gave the whole yard a warm, amber glow visible from my fence line. The sound of it carried clearly in the still air. Voices layered over soft music, the clink of glasses, the occasional bright spike of laughter. The pool caught the lights and threw them back in moving patterns across the underside of the tent. 42 people, by my count, including the county supervisor, 2 real estate developers, the Briar Creek HOA district rep, a woman from the planning commission, and Earl Whitman, who had apparently dressed up for the occasion. It looked, I will admit, like a genuinely nice party. I crossed my back field in the dark, flashlight off, boots quiet on the dry grass. That faint scratch and whisper of late summer turf underfoot. I reached the valve box. I took the key from my pocket. I unlocked it, lifted the lid, and looked at the gate valve handle for a moment the way you look at a chess piece before you move it. Then I closed it. Full shut, quarter turn, and locked the box back up. I walked back to my porch and sat down with Priscilla's thermos. 22 minutes later, I heard it. A change in the ambient sound from next door. The music was still going, but underneath it, a new note, a woman's voice, clipped and rising, the kind of voice that is trying very hard to stay controlled and failing. Then the slap of heels on pavers. Cordelia Wentworth appeared at my fence line at 9:11 p.m., still holding a glass of white wine, still wearing the blazer, flanked by her caterer and by Fitzgerald Horn, who had apparently been a party guest and was now trying to look like a lawyer, which was undermined by the fact that he was wearing a Nantucket Reds and a linen shirt. "You cut the water," she said. Her voice was low and tight. "I shut my valve," I said from the porch. "On my line, on my property. You are sabotaging a private event. There are witnesses." "There certainly are." I walked to the fence, reached over and handed her a laminated packet. She took it without thinking, reflex, and looked down at it. "What is this?" Page 1 is the county water theft notice with your fine total to date. Page 2 is the 1963 deed covenant, prohibiting unauthorized water diversion for recreational use. Page 3 is the contractor invoice, showing your plumber installed that tap this spring, which legally invalidates your prescriptive easement claim. Page 4 is the building authority's record of the fraudulent signature on your pool variance application. Page 5 is the HOA financial audit demand, signed by 5 members, invoking Section 12, Paragraph 7 of the bylaws. I had handed her 12 copies. In the pause that followed, the caterer picked one up. The HOA district rep, who had followed Cordelia to the fence in the way that people follow conflict when they sense it will require their professional attention, picked one up. He opened it to page 2 and went very still. At 9:05, before I had even started speaking, a Culpeper County Sheriff's deputy had arrived at Cordelia's front gate. He was there to serve a formal notice of investigation regarding the fraudulent variance signature, a civil fraud referral that Rebecca had coordinated with the building authority's compliance officer that afternoon. The deputy made his way around the side of the house to the pool area, politely, without drama, and asked for Cordelia Wentworth. She was standing at my fence reading page 3. From the road, Stanton Price's camera was running. Public right-of-way, full legal, no issues. He would later describe the scene in print as a masterclass in sequential consequence. The county supervisor had stepped away from the bar. His phone was at his ear. Rebecca Okafor, from her home office, was reading him the deed covenant clause and the implications for any public official who had attended an event facilitated by a fraudulent construction permit. He set his glass down on a folding table and did not pick it up again. Cordelia looked up from the packet at me. The amber string lights caught her face, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not bluster, just a kind of exhausted calculation, the look of someone who has run out of moves and knows it. "What do you want?" she said. "I want my water back," I said. "I want my fence markers back. I want your lawyer to stop filing motions citing the wrong statutes. And I want the HOA to get a real audit." I stepped back from the fence. "You'll be hearing from Rebecca Okafor." I turned around and walked back to my porch, thermos in hand, dry grass crunching under my boots, the string lights fading behind me as I went. Behind me, I heard the deputy say something, then Cordelia's voice, then silence. The particular silence of a party that has stopped being a party. It was a beautiful evening. 3 months later, the tap was gone. Court-ordered removal, executed by a licensed plumber under county supervision, with a full remediation of the trench and a concrete cap on my main line where the branch had been. I watched it happen from my fence line on a clear October morning with a cup of coffee and no particular expression on my face, because I had made my peace with all of it weeks before. The county fines had been upheld, $250 per day from the date of the notice through the date of removal, plus remediation costs. The total came to just over $19,000. Fitzgerald Horn's firm withdrew from the case shortly before the fraud investigation formally opened, which, in the legal world, is the attorney equivalent of a rat leaving a ship that is very clearly sinking. The building authority's fraud investigation into the forged pool variance signature concluded with a referral to the County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. I won't speculate on the outcome of that process. It was ongoing at the time of this writing. But I will note that pool permits don't get reissued while fraud investigations are active. The pool, structurally sound and aesthetically expensive, sat largely unused through the fall. The HOA audit, conducted by an independent CPA firm brought in under Section 12, Paragraph 7, found $11,400 in dues funds that had been applied to expenditures with insufficient documentation or clear personal benefit to board members. The HOA board, meaning the remaining members who hadn't been Cordelia, filed a civil recovery suit. Cordelia resigned from the board by letter. She did not attend the next community meeting. Eugenia Thackeray was voted onto the board by unanimous consent. Her first act was to move for a financial transparency amendment, requiring quarterly independent review of all discretionary expenditures above $500. It passed without objection. Priscilla's sweet corn came in at the end of September, the best yield we'd had in 5 years, which she attributed to the restored water pressure through August. She sold a portion of it at the Culpeper Farmers Market and donated the proceeds to the county food bank. The rest we put up ourselves, frozen, canned, given to neighbors. Eugenia got 3 dozen ears and a jar of relish. She called it the best corn she'd had since the 90s. Terrell, who had found the tap in the first place, had been quietly documenting all of it. Photos, timestamps, notes. He put together a written account that Stanton Price helped him shape into a regional feature for the Star Exponent. It ran under the headline, "When Your Neighbor Taps Your Well, One Culpeper Family's Water Rights Fight, and What It Means for Rural Property Owners." It was picked up by 2 statewide papers and a national rural issues newsletter. The response to that story was the thing that moved me most. Hundreds of people, landowners in Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, places I'd never been, wrote in with their own stories. Private water lines tapped, easements abused, HOA funds misused, people who didn't know they had options because nobody had explained the tools to them. That is how the Briar Creek Rural Water Access Fund started. Eugenia and I co-founded it with a $5,000 seed contribution and a simple mission: provide microgrants to low-income rural homeowners in Culpeper and surrounding counties for private water system inspection, repair, and legal consultation related to water rights. By the end of the first year, we had 14 community donors and had helped 6 families. It is, I think, what my grandfather would have done with it. You protect your land, you vindicate your rights, and then you build something that helps the person who doesn't have your resources do the same.